But tonight, Meghan Markle sat across from Greg Gutfeld, and something in her posture suggested she'd prepared for the wrong kind of interview entirely. Greg opened with what sounded like genuine admiration. Meghan, cautiously composed, settled into what she assumed might be an opportunity to reach a new audience. Then Greg mentioned the produce guide, just casually, with that deceptive lightness he deployed before the sharpest questions. What Meghan said made Greg's eyebrows rise. What Greg said after that, still smiling, still charming, but building towards something that would leave the studio audience audibly gasping, would dominate entertainment coverage by morning. And tonight, Meghan Markle was about to discover exactly how that technique worked. This is the interview that shocked everyone. Subscribe now, hit that notification bell, and let's see what happened. The Gutfeld studio carried its usual weeknight energy. The familiar desk, the panel set up to Greg's right, the live audience that had made this show the highest-rated program in late-night television. 3 million viewers every night. Greg had built something entirely singular, a conservative comedy show that somehow managed to be genuinely funny, which was considerably harder than it looked. Meghan arrived with her usual entourage, publicist, handler, someone monitoring energy levels, settling into the guest chair with practiced composure. Meghan Markle on Gutfeld. This is genuinely brave of you, and I mean that without a single drop of sarcasm, which is unusual for me. Meghan's smile was measured. Thank you, Greg. I believe in engaging across different audiences. Engaging across audiences. That's either admirable or you've run out of sympathetic ones. Maybe both. Let's find out. I want to start with something genuinely current, Greg said, his tone carrying that deceptive lightness. The As Ever Produce Guide, July 14th. Lovely graphic. Cherries, tomatoes, strawberries, basil, mint. Very seasonal. Very beautiful. Also the exact day the CDC issued a health alert about 7,000 cases of cyclosporiasis, which is a parasitic intestinal illness causing what the health bulletins diplomatically call explosive diarrhea, linked to summer produce. Meghan's expression didn't move. I don't monitor every CDC health bulletin before posting seasonal content. No, obviously. Nobody expects that. But do you think your lifestyle brand might want a quick agricultural review process before posting a fruit guide during an intestinal parasite outbreak? Even just a cursory, anything happening with berries this week? Check. The guide was about celebrating seasonal abundance. And it certainly celebrated something. The CDC has different words for what 7,000 people experienced. Kat laughed. Tyrus looked genuinely amused. The audience followed. Meghan's composure held, but only just. Let's talk about the Emmy nomination, Greg continued, pivoting smoothly. With Love, Meghan got its first daytime Emmy nomination for Outstanding Lifestyle Program. That's genuinely notable. But here's what I'm curious about. The show was widely reported to have underperformed. Netflix sources described the relationship as essentially finished, and now there's an Emmy nomination. How do those things coexist? Recognition from the Television Academy speaks for itself. Sure, but daytime Emmy nominations don't usually contradict reported commercial failure. Or do they? I genuinely don't know how that works. Is there a category for technically produced content that generated significant industry chatter? The show connected with its audience. The audience that apparently wasn't large enough to continue the Netflix relationship? I'm not being cruel, I'm genuinely trying to understand the business model where commercial failure and industry recognition happen simultaneously. The UK trip, Greg continued, his tone still light but increasingly pointed. Family trip to see the king, historic moment, Highgrove House, the children meeting their grandfather, all wonderful. But let me ask about the produce guide timing again. You posted summer fruit content while an intestinal parasite outbreak was happening, and presumably you were preparing for this trip simultaneously. Was there any irony awareness in the room? I won't connect unrelated events. They're only unrelated if you ignore the calendar. July 14th, produce guide. July outbreak, intestinal illness. July trip, historic family reunion. A lot happening in July for the Sussex household. You're manufacturing connections that don't exist. I'm noting a timeline that exists entirely independently of me. The CDC issued the bulletin. You posted the guide. The internet noticed. I'm just the latest person to observe it. The UK trip more broadly, Greg said, shifting gears but maintaining momentum. The children went to Highgrove, met the King and Queen Camilla. First proper visit in years. Beautiful story. But you were there too this time, weren't you? Which is actually a change from what had been reported earlier. We traveled as a family. Good. So all the reporting about security concerns preventing your travel was resolved. What actually changed? Appropriate arrangements were made. Appropriate arrangements that took 4 years to figure out. 4 years of legal battles, public accusations, claims about institutional blocking, and then appropriate arrangements were suddenly made. What was different this time specifically? Every situation evolves. Everything with you evolves. Nothing fails, nothing changes. It all just evolves. Spotify evolved. Netflix evolved. The security situation evolved. Your brand evolved from American Riviera Orchard to as ever. At what point does evolution become just a nicer word for something else? The daytime Emmy situation raises something interesting, Greg continued. Because here's what I've noticed about your public story. When things go well, they're achievements. When things don't go well, they evolve. When people leave your organization, they're transitions. When business relationships end, they're creative differences. There's no category in your vocabulary for straightforward failure. Everything has a softer name. Framing matters in how we discuss setbacks. Framing matters, sure. But at some point, relentless reframing stops being perspective and starts being spin. I've done this show for years. I know spin. I recognize it in politicians, in executives, in celebrities. What I'm hearing from you tonight is exceptionally polished spin. That's an unfair characterization. It's pattern recognition. What would you call a failure if it happened? What's your word for something that just didn't work, without the evolution or the creative difference or the systemic context? What's your failure word? Silence. The silence is informative. The staff situation at Archwell, Greg said, pressing forward. We've talked about this on the show before. High turnover, 18 departures by some counts, difficult working conditions reportedly. What's your actual explanation? Every organization experiences staffing transitions. 18 of them, in relatively quick succession. From a foundation that employs how many people total? The math on that turnover rate is extraordinary. We maintain high standards. High standards that nobody seems able to meet consistently? That's either very high standards or a different problem entirely. Which is it? You're making assumptions based on incomplete information. I'm making calculations based on reported numbers. If those numbers are wrong, correct them. If they're right, the calculation produces a conclusion regardless of my assumptions. Let me try something different, Greg said, leaning back. I'm going to ask you a genuine question, and I want a genuine answer rather than a talking point. Ready? Meghan looked cautious. That depends on the question. It's simple. Name one thing that went wrong in the last 3 years that you'd describe as actually your fault. Not systemic context, not creative differences, not evolution. Your fault. One thing. Silence stretched. See, I ask this of everyone. Politicians, executives, celebrities. Most people, even the most defensive ones, can eventually find something. Even a small thing. Even something peripheral. You can't access anything? I prefer to focus on forward progress. Forward progress from what, though? If you can't name what went wrong, how do you know what you're progressing forward from? The divorce rumors, Greg said, shifting but maintaining his methodical approach. Persistent, specific, ongoing. Your team has issued formal denials. What's your actual response? Tabloid speculation without foundation. Speculation that generated a formal response from your representatives, which is the part I always find interesting. Happy, settled couples don't usually require press releases confirming their happiness. What specifically required the statement? False narratives spread without correction. False narratives spread when there's oxygen. What's the oxygen here? Because these rumors are remarkably specific. Financial strain, different priorities, Harry wanting to return to England while you don't. Specific rumors usually have specific sources. People with agendas invent details. They invent details around something, though. Pure fiction doesn't usually generate this level of sustained, specific speculation. What's the core of it? Your father, Greg said, his tone shifting to something more direct. Thomas Markle, elderly, had health complications, publicly asking for reconciliation. Given everything about family healing happening around the UK trip, has he come up at all? Meghan's expression closed. That relationship is private. Private, yet you've discussed it extensively in your own documentaries and interviews. What makes it private now specifically? There's history that isn't appropriate to air. You've aired it extensively before, on your own platforms, for your own purposes. It seems to become private specifically when the questions get harder to answer. Every relationship has limits on disclosure. Sure, but your relationship with your father has very few limits as long as you're controlling the narrative. The moment someone else asks about it, limits appear. That pattern is interesting. Let me bring something back up, Greg said. The produce guide. Because I genuinely want to understand the as-ever brand philosophy. You've described it as celebrating abundance, seasonal living, a particular kind of intentional lifestyle. But the guide appeared during a produce-related health outbreak. The jam brand had issues earlier. The Netflix lifestyle show received mixed reception. Is the lifestyle brand working the way you'd hoped? We're building something meaningful over time. Building how? What's been built specifically? I know what you're building toward. I've read the mission statements. What's been built already? Our audience is growing. Growing to what size? From what base? Those are specific numbers you'd have if you had them. I don't share proprietary business metrics publicly. Most growing businesses are happy to share directional metrics without specifics. Our audience has doubled, or we've reached 1 million people. The refusal to characterize growth at all suggests the characterization wouldn't be flattering. I want to talk about something you've said publicly, Greg continued. You've described yourself as a target of racism within the royal family. You've described your experience as uniquely difficult. You've described the institution as harmful. And now you're back. Your children have met the king. You stayed in England. Your husband was welcomed at events. Help me understand how uniquely harmful racist institution and we had a lovely family visit coexist. People and institutions can change. People and institutions that you described as fundamentally harmful, not temporarily flawed. You characterized the racism as institutional. Institutions don't change in 4 years. What actually changed? I prefer not to revisit those characterizations in this context. You made those characterizations in very public contexts. Walking them back quietly, by simply behaving as though they weren't said, is a specific choice. Why not acknowledge the change directly? This isn't what I came here to discuss. What did you come here to discuss? Greg asked genuinely. Because I'm curious now. You chose this show specifically. We've been fairly pointed in our coverage of you previously. What outcome did you expect from this appearance? I wanted to reach a different audience. Reach them how? With what message? Because so far, every specific question has gotten a general answer. Every direct question has gotten deflection. What were you actually hoping to communicate to 3 million Fox News late-night viewers? I believe in the importance of genuine dialogue. Dialogue requires two-way exchange of substantive information. What I've had tonight is mostly one-directional deflection. That's not dialogue. That's managed appearance. You've been consistently described as difficult to work with, Greg said, his tone still measured, but now carrying something more definitive. Across different industries, different contexts, different years. The staff departures, the business relationships that ended badly, the media coverage that became hostile. At what point does a pattern like that require self-examination rather than external explanation? Meghan's composure cracked fully now. You're compiling grievances against me. I'm asking about a documented pattern across your public life. That's not compilation. That's observation of existing data points. This entire interview has been hostile. This entire interview has been curious. I've been genuinely interested in the answers. The problem isn't my curiosity. It's that the answers keep not arriving. Meghan grabbed her purse. I won't continue being talked about this way. You're not being talked about. You're being talked to. That's actually more respectful than the alternative, which is simply discussing you in your absence, which is what most of television does. Meghan moved toward the exit. This show has made money treating me as content. This show has made money treating everyone as content. Politicians, celebrities, ideas, events. You're not special in that respect, which is itself interesting. Most people find the lack of special treatment either refreshing or infuriating. You've clearly landed in column B. History will remember how I was treated. History will remember someone who posted a summer produce guide during a CDC parasitic illness alert, got a daytime Emmy nomination for a show that reportedly ended a major streaming relationship, couldn't name a single personal failure, and walked off a comedy show because the jokes kept landing accurately. He paused. That's not mean. That's just the weak. Meghan left. The studio door closed behind her. Greg turned to his panel with that particular expression. Amused, slightly disappointed, entirely unsurprised. Well, that tracked. Kat laughed. She clearly came prepared for a different kind of interview. She came prepared for interview-shaped conversation that didn't actually require answering anything. What she got was actual questions. Those are different experiences. Tyrus shook his head. The produce guide thing got her, though. The produce guide is the gift that keeps giving, Greg said. It encapsulates something real about the entire brand, the gap between the aesthetic and the awareness. Beautiful imagery, insufficient calendar checking. Greg addressed the camera directly. I want to be genuine for a moment, which is uncomfortable for me, so bear with it. I called her appearance brave because it genuinely was. Coming on this show after years of our coverage took something. Most celebrities in her position wouldn't have done it. He straightened. But bravery in showing up doesn't resolve the questions. The produce guide still happened. The business failures still occurred. The staff still departed. The father is still estranged. The brother-in-law is still unreachable. These aren't fabrications. They're documented events that produce reasonable questions. He shrugged. What I got tonight was the same thing everyone else gets. Polished non-answers dressed up as engagement. The difference is that on this show, we notice, and we mention it, sometimes with jokes attached. For Greg Gutfeld, the interview became another demonstration of what years of political comedy had taught him. The ability to make people laugh while simultaneously extracting truths they hadn't intended to share, through warmth rather than confrontation. For Meghan Markle, it was uniquely damaging in a specific way. Greg wasn't hostile press. He wasn't British tabloid journalism. He was American late-night comedy, theoretically the most forgiving format imaginable. and she couldn't navigate even his comedic curiosity about her own documented public record. Greg made jokes. Meghan called them hostile. Greg asked about the produce guide. Meghan couldn't explain the timing. Greg asked for one failure. Meghan offered silence. Greg asked what she'd come to communicate. Meghan walked out instead. And in that departure, in that inability to survive even warm, humorous accountability for her own documented week, everything anyone needed to know about the gap between Meghan Markle's carefully constructed public image and the actual questions that image couldn't answer became impossible to ignore. Some people can laugh at themselves. Others prove they've lost the ability entirely. Greg offered comedy. Meghan brought a press release. The highest-rated show in late night couldn't find anything genuine to work with, because Meghan brought nothing genuine with her. Just talking points. Always talking points. 3 million viewers every night. A produce guide during a CDC parasite outbreak. An Emmy nomination for a show that reportedly ended a major streaming relationship. And she couldn't name one personal failure. What does that tell you about the space between image and reality? If you want more content that recognizes when comedy reveals what journalism couldn't, subscribe, drop a like, share this with someone. They need to see what happens when jokes keep landing accurately. More accuracy, more comedy, more of what years of satirical television teaches you about the gap between talking points and truth.